almost see my breath in the studio right now. I should have turned the heater on before I set everything up, but I didn't. Hey everyone, my name is Scott and I am a photographer and filmmaker based in beautiful Vancouver, British Columbia. It's been a couple of months since I've made a YouTube video, and everyone knows the best way to drive engagement on YouTube is to make videos as infrequently as possible. Anyways, if you're new around here, I typically make videos about Fujifilm camera gear or about obscure older digital camera gear, stuff that nobody is talking about, like really old CCD censored DSLRs, or stuff that shared bodies with film SLR cameras that they stuck a sensor in, or I talk about mobile photography and filmmaking and how to rig out your camera or your smartphone for photography and filmmaking. All right, so today we're talking about something I've never talked about on this channel before, and that is a full frame digital camera. I always have shot APS-C cameras. I've never seen the need for anything above what I currently shoot with. I have a 3-year-old Fujifilm X-T30 up there. That's my primary camera. I've got a bunch of old obscure digital cameras with CCD sensors and just some really old weird stuff that I love. I've got a bunch of old Fujifilm X-series bodies, some of the original stuff, the X Pro one, the XT one. I had an X100 I just sold. I've got an X70, I've got an XA1. That first gen Fujifilm X series stuff is incredible. The XT30 kind of does everything really well. But full frame mirrorless is something I've never felt the need to spend the extra money on, quite frankly. It's pricey to get into full frame mirrorless cameras. Sony was nice enough to send me an A7 IV to review. Now, I've been on Sony's media email list for a couple of years, but I think the PR company they were using was only sending to US based reviewers or photographers or filmmakers, and I guess that's changed. So here we are with an A7 IV. We've got the 28-70 kit lens, the 50mm f1.8, so just the plastic sort of nifty 50, and then this beast of a lens. I dropped some stuff off it. We're going to start again. This is the 70-200 f2.8 G Master 2 lens. If you see that little red G on a Sony lens, you know that it costs a lot of money, and you know it's probably going to be pretty good. So what have I done with this camera? I inadvertently ended up in a protest. I was on a staycation here in downtown Vancouver, and some crazy protest rolled through. I'm not going to post any of the pictures except for one from that protest. It's a whole thing that I don't want to get into. I took a couple of night shots with this camera the night before when we were downtown. I also took it out to shoot some wildlife around Burnaby Lake, which is a local regional park here. And then I took it to my favorite place to review new cameras, Steveston, which is a fishing community, sort of touristy fishing community right on the Pacific Ocean, where the Fraser River meets the Pacific Ocean, in Richmond, which is a suburb of Vancouver. So why Sony? Why not Canon? Why not Nikon? Why not whatever? I mean, no reason really other than the fact that Sony reached out to me, but I do have a history with Minolta cameras. I have a very extensive collection of Minolta film cameras, including my coveted Minolta Maxim 7000. I actually have two of them now. which one of them was my mother's and the other one I just bought from a local friend whose dad was selling his entire camera setup. One of my favorite film cameras of all time. If you're getting into film photography, it's a great place to start. It does everything for you, and then work your way back from there to manual shooting. But this thing's got a 33 megapixel full frame sensor. It's a backside illuminated CMOS sensor. 33 megapixels for me is this really great sort of sweet spot between just way too big, like the A7R cameras. They're like 50, 60 megapixels, or even the GFX cameras. And, you know, 24 on the low end, like my XT30. If you're shooting for anything commercial or anything that you want to blow up, I mean, you can do it with 24. 33 is a really, really nice size. You can still crop quite a bit, or you can blow stuff up for bigger commercial work. It'll shoot up to 10 frames per second in RAW. I got everything written down here. I'm normally not a script guy, but there was just too much to remember about this camera. Being not familiar with the system, I need the assist. It's got in-body stabilization up to 5.5 EV, which is fantastic. I've never shot with in-body stabilization before, except for in a Pentax KP, but yeah, this is on a whole other level. It shoots 4K, oversample full width 4K, so it shoots in 7K and then it downsamples to 4K, up to 30 frames per second. 4K 60 in Super 35 and APS-C mode. It's weather sealed. It's got dual card slots. It's got 10-bit recording, H.265 video. It's got the S-Cinetone color mode, so it matches up with a lot of other Sony cameras, even their cinema camera lines. It's got a 3.69 million dot OLED viewfinder. The viewfinder on this thing is phenomenal. It's nice and big and bright and detailed. What did I like about this camera? Well, one of the things that I really liked about this camera is the ergonomics. The ergonomics of this thing are fantastic. The grip is so comfortable. The shutter button falls just perfectly under your finger. And I know that seems like such a no-brainer, but a friend of mine who has a Sony a7, the original version of this camera, commented on what a stupid location the original a7 had a shutter button, and it was like back here somewhere. And he absolutely hated it. He still has that camera, and maybe he'll upgrade to one of these. The dial and button layout on the back is nice and simple, tons of customization. It's got a mode dial on the top. All of these dials are customizable. It's got 3 dials, 1, 2, 3, 4 customizable buttons. It's got a fully flip out and rotatable screen, which is good for vlogging and good for weird angled shots, which I actually took advantage of in that protest that shall not speak its name. The image quality on this thing is fantastic. The dynamic range is very good. I was able to just do a ton to these things in Lightroom. Yeah, there's just so much flexibility in the highlights and the shadows. It's actually very, very impressive. But that being said, I did notice in low light, there was a little bit more noise at higher ISOs than I was expecting. You know, full frame sensor, 33 megapixels. I don't think it was better than the APS-C cameras I shoot with. And I actually think in a couple of instances, the noise, especially in the sky, if it was a dark sky with some clouds, was maybe kind of worse. Maybe I'll throw up the picture that I'm thinking of in my head as I'm talking here. But yeah, I think the low light performance, it was very good, but I wasn't blown away by it. And it was actually sort of surprising how much noise crept into a couple of the images. So not shooting this system full time. I don't have any extra batteries for it, which is, in a mirrorless camera for me, having extra batteries is like a necessity. But I found that this battery lasted me all day. I had no issues with battery life whatsoever, and that was shooting photos, video, IBIS turned on, sometimes having an external mic plugged into this thing. So yeah, no problem, all day shooting. I don't know what the shot rating is on this battery, but I didn't have any issues with it whatsoever. Video quality was very good. The 4K 24 that you'll see a little bit of during this review, it looked great. The full frame gives this f3.5. This is f3.5 on the wide end, this kit lens. It gives it a very similar depth of field to the 18 millimeter wide end of my 18 to 55 f2.8 that I normally shoot with on the X-T30. So 3.5, 2.8, you're getting a very similar background blur at the same distance. And I've always kind of been this guy that didn't really believe the full frame depth of field thing, but now having actually used it and seen it and whatever, it's totally real. There is a difference between sensor size and the lens is made for a specific sensor size. You're gonna get a different depth of field out of a different f-stop. Somebody's going to correct me in the comments, and that's fine, but just looking at it with your own eyes, when you see that background blur of a 28 at 3.5 at a certain distance versus an 18 at 2.8 at the same distance, I get it now. I get it, okay? So all the people over the years that have told me I'm crazy, you were right. And another thing with this camera system in general is the lens lineup is fantastic now, and that was sort of a struggle early on with this system, as it was for all of these systems, all of these mirrorless camera systems starting out, but Sony's lens lineup seemed to take a little bit longer to kind of mature, and now it's just a fully fleshed out lens lineup with lots of third-party support as well. There's some excellent Tamron glass out there for this mount as well, so yeah, you're really looked after in terms of lens options. Now the IBIS in this thing was very good for photos. It was okay for video. I wasn't really blown away by it. It sort of struggled with intentional camera movements as well as walking. There are some cameras that are almost gimbal-like with their IBIS mixed with OIS, which this combo has. This camera didn't really achieve that level of stability. There's some noticeable sort of overcompensating for footsteps, and yeah, I don't know if I call that disappointing. I think it was expected, but I wish it was a little bit better. The autofocus system for video, fantastic. Locked onto my face, no problem. I did just a quick little vlogging thing walking down to my car when I was heading to Steveston. This thing does eye detect with sunglasses on. That's crazy. Like it's locked onto that lens right now. Yeah, the fact that the face detect AF kept that eye autofocus locked on my eyeball when I had sunglasses on. That was kind of mind-blowing, to be honest. But then I found that for photos, the continuous autofocus would quite often pick the wrong subject, and I tried a bunch of different modes and a bunch of different settings, and it would just always seem to pick whatever was closest to it. And even if I got it to pick up on the subject that I wanted it to pick up on and half pressed the shutter to try to lock onto it, as soon as I crossed over something else, the autofocus would grab that other thing and start following that instead. And I don't know if I was doing something wrong, or if it's just an issue with the AF system, or if it's just that's what the AF system in this camera does. But it was a little bit frustrating, especially for wildlife. I found it quite tough to get focus where I wanted on birds in trees and moving subjects. And I think for a sports camera, you're going to want to look somewhere else, maybe higher up in the Sony lineup. But there's definitely some improvement to be made there in the continuous AF in certain scenarios. And as much as it's like really cliche to talk about Sony menus, like every video I watch talks about Sony menus, they're trash. They're absolute trash. They're a confusing mess. And apparently these are better than they have been in the past. Man, I don't want to use an older Sony camera if these are improved, because they are just a jumbled disaster. Now, it's like anything. I guess once you're used to it, you know, you'll be able to navigate those menus no problem. But I find that picking up a Canon or a Nikon or a Fuji or a Pentax, it's pretty easy to figure out their menu systems. with, you know, just a little bit of navigating around and seeing where everything is. They're sort of intuitive, whereas this is just not. And then the final drawback that I found with this camera, I took my memory card out of this camera and I put it in my computer to transfer the files over, and there were no files there. There was nothing. There was the DCIM, is that what it is, folder, no videos. So I looked it up online and found that you had to download specific software from Sony in order to put these files on your computer. So I downloaded the software, transferred the videos over to my computer, and then I was able to view them, and they were all there. But it just seems it's 2022. Why do we need that extra step of proprietary software? I think that's just a really strange choice. Okay, so for a dedicated hardcore APS-C shooter and a bit of a Fujifilm fanboy, is full frame worth the hype? I hate to say it, but yeah, I think it is. The dynamic range is there. That improved depth of field is definitely there. Yeah, sorry guys, it's a more pleasing shooting experience to me. Is it worth the price increase? I don't know. So this camera body only is $2,500 US at the time of recording. You can pick up a Fujifilm X-T4 for $1,000 less. Will the X-T4 be able to keep up with this camera in most scenarios? Yeah, and I think it's honestly better than this camera in some scenarios. But that full frame look, the flexibility of these files, the dynamic range, is fantastic. The X-T4 is still using the same sensor that came out in the X-T3, and that was in like 2018, 2019. It's not a new sensor at all. Like it's kind of shockingly old at this point that they haven't really come out with a new camera or a new sensor. Everything's just sort of a rebody of the existing stuff that they have, or a spec bump that could have been a firmware upgrade. I mean, you're talking to an XT30 owner. They just launched the XT32, XT30 II2. They didn't even bother putting the 2 on the body because, like, there's no difference between the two. It's literally just a software upgrade. It could have been a firmware upgrade. Oh, Scott, there's a different processor, blah, blah, blah. It's the same camera. It's absolutely ridiculous. Fujifilm, what are you doing? So would someone like me ever consider switching to this system? Honestly, yeah, maybe. I'm at a point now where my photography and videography stuff is becoming sort of self-sustaining, and I think that it's worth the upgrade to full frame. I really think it is. And you know, the lenses cost more money, the bodies cost more money, everything costs more money, so it's definitely something to think about. Is the Fujifilm X series not good enough for professional use? No, not at all. It's absolutely fine for professional use, and most people, they're going to be totally blown away by the results you get with any modern camera, to be honest. Any modern camera with a micro four thirds or bigger sensor is fully capable of doing professional photo and video work, and the results are more dependent on the person using it as opposed to the technology. But yeah, this is a very tempting little camera, and I say little because, you know, for a full frame camera, it is quite small. It is bigger, obviously, than my X-T30, which is very, very small, but it definitely has given me some pause, thinking about what I want to see out of Fujifilm, because I'll be honest with you, the last few years I haven't seen it. I've seen just small upgrades. They've sort of completely abandoned their customer base in terms of the old Kaizen firmware upgrades that we used to get with every camera body, where it seemed like you'd almost had a new camera a year and a half after you bought it because they had updated so many things. Do you remember the XE2? They came out with an XE2S, which was a, you know, it's a similar thing to the XT32 and the XT30. But then they took the XE2 and they offered a firmware upgrade to make it exactly the same as the XE2S. They don't do that stuff anymore. And it's really, really noticeable as a Fujifilm customer that they don't do that stuff anymore. So am I thinking about switching? I don't know, but it sure is tempting. And this is a fantastic camera. So shout out to Sony for sending this stuff my way. This lens in particular was an absolute blast to shoot with. Shooting wildlife at Burnaby Lake with this thing was excellent. This kit lens, very, very nice. I didn't shoot with a 50 that much. I think if I owned this system, I would probably spend a little more time with this, or maybe it's weird because I shoot with a 35 1.4 on my Fujifilms, which is about a 50mm equivalent. So this should be a similar shooting experience, but I didn't really get along with this lens. Nothing wrong with it. The files or the images it creates are very nice, and the f1.8 on full frame is very, very tasty and delicious, but maybe a 35mm. Maybe I want slightly wider on full frame. I don't know. And then I have the ability to crop in as well. So be definitely something to think about if I did switch. I don't want to tell you guys that I'm going to be making videos more often because I have no idea. But thanks for tuning into this one. And again, thanks to Sony for sending me all this stuff. I got to send it back in a couple of days. So hopefully I can get this video edited and out to you guys in short order. But I hope everyone's well. And I will see you guys in the next video.